Okay, so now that the sound guy approved, let's go. Morning, everybody. Bom dia a todos. We are about to start our session, and we have some announcements. First thing, let's check some changes on the program. So this is the update program for today. Tomorrow. So yeah, that's tomorrow. Yes, I have to scroll. Okay, this is the updated program for today. And I will have the Dr. Yen Zemar from India. He will be remote. He asked for starting today. And this conference is being transmitted by YouTube online. So we will soon make available the web link. So if you want to tell your people from your institutes that we are transmitting online, it's just clicking on the cbpf.br, and you will find the YouTube transmission there. And Ulysses have worked with the Brazilian Academy of Sciences so that we can have proceedings of this meeting for free. So the Brazilian Academy of Science publishes regularly their magazine, their journal, and they will be happy to host the proceedings of this meeting. So everybody that wants to publish your presentation, contact us after. Then they have some model for the printing, or it's free? Yeah, we give you more details after, but we will have proceedings of this meeting, and even they say if you have several talks and papers on the newspaper, they can even do a separate newspaper just for the proceedings. They can publish the journal just for the proceedings. If there are a few papers on that, they can just join our proceedings on the regular number of the journal. But if everybody send the proposals there, the papers, they will publish an independent number. So this is nice. We'll give you details up front. And on the next interval for the coffee break, the ones that have the talks already on the pen drive and can upload here, please. And I think that's it for the secretariat. And I'll give you more information as we go. And I would like to invite Dr. Takalani to start with the first talk. Okay. You have your own microphone. Yes.
Okay, good morning. Can you all hear me? All right. Thank you. Okay, so is it not working? Oh, let's see.
No,
But it's on here.
You just have to make it closer.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's try again.
Is it better?
Tem que chegar muito pertinho. Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Well, just to give you a progress presentation on the BRICS Astronomy Working Group and the workshops we've been having over the last 5 years. This is a bit of a different logo to the one that you are normally used to, but I took it from when Brazil, because they are occupying the presidency. I think initially they designed this logo, although in our material we have kind of stuck with the logo we've been using for the last 5 years, but I think that's the reason why I'm having a different logo here. I don't know if, Bruno, they used it at the BRICS meeting you attended to use. Oh, this one, yeah. All right, okay. Well, astronomy, why was it astronomy also chosen as a priority science area for the BRICS? But also, I think this is also why we are involved in astronomy as well, is because it helps us to answer some fundamental questions, you know, on the origins of the universe and humanity's place in it. Basically creating a better understanding of the universe, but it is also seen as a driver of innovation and also as an important catalyst for, you know, scientific and technological developments, but also as a gateway science, you know, for outreach. The BRICS Astronomy Working Group, as I indicated, came out you know, as one of the thematic areas from the BRICS Science, Technology, and Innovation Ministerial Meeting, the inaugural meeting which took place in Cape Town back in 2014, and identified these 5 thematic science priority areas, and that's why we are here, because South Africa was chosen as the lead. Of course, other BRICS countries are leading in other areas as well. And so these BRICS ministerial meetings convene on an annual basis. And the structure is that from the ministerial, you've got the senior officials meetings of the director generals of the various ministries. And then from there, you have the working group, which is ourselves here, which is really expert groups in a specific area of focus. And the work of the BRICS Astronomy Working Group you know, is really for promoting cooperation activities in the astronomy area, but also to convene these meetings at least frequently, once a year. And it's supposed to be composed of, you know, government officials as well as astronomers, you know, in this case. And as I indicated, you know, South Africa, you know, is chairing and providing secretariat support for this BAWG. And, you know, this is basically the role of the secretariat, is to really provide administrative support, coordinating the activities, facilitating the development of content, and ensuring follow-up action, but also capturing the proceedings of these meetings and disseminating, you know, the information. And so we do have a website where you can access all the historical documents since 2015. And then we always have workshops back-to-back, held back-to-back with the BRICS Astronomy Working Groups. So it just makes it easier for logistics and also minimizing the costs. Later on, I'll tell you more about the BRICS astronomy strategy, which was developed, and it basically defined these areas, you know, as areas of common interest and priority areas within the BRICS, you know, collaboration. So we had the first workshop in 2015 in Cape Town, and the focus of that workshop was on policy instruments, innovation, industry, and developments and opportunities within the BRICS countries. And then we also, at that time, developed the terms of reference for this working group. And then also we started a process of drafting the BRICS strategy of astronomy, which we call the BRICS framework for scientific cooperation in astronomy. I think this was the second, I don't have the picture for the first meeting in Cape Town, but I think this was the second meeting we had in Russia, in Ekaterinburg, which was hosted at the Ural Federal University. You can see Vadim and Paul Bolly were our hosts there, and they are still here, also with us here in Brazil. And then you can see some of the usual suspects as well. in the picture. And then, yeah, so I think this was the meeting in Ekaterinburg, and the workshop focused on astronomical data and computation. We were able to finalize the terms of reference, and then we were making some good progress on the science plan. And then also during that year, there was a first BRICS call for proposal, which was issued in that year. I think this was the third meeting that was held in Pune, in India, at Ayuka, hosted by Professor Gupta. And the focus was on astronomy infrastructure and instrumentation. And also during that meeting, we were able to, agree on the activities, that we wanted to work on, which at that time also replaced what we were initially, we were talking about this science plan as a roadmap, but that's when we changed it to a science plan. And then also during that time, there was a call. It was at a point where after 3 years of working together, I think the community started feeling that we need to start working on flagship projects, for this group. And at that time, we said, at least if we can develop 3 or 4 possible flagship projects. At that time, we only requested concepts. And we had provided a template so that by the next meeting, we can evaluate these flagship proposals. And also at the time, that's when we were able to finalize this framework document or the science plan, which agreed on what constitute short-term activities within the partnership, what will constitute medium term, and of course, the flagship programs being seen as long-term proposals that we need to work on. And then last year was the previous or the last meeting we had in South Africa, in Kwamhlanga, in Durban. So as you can see from the picture there, the meeting which we had. At this point, I wanted to just also announce that Dr. Thomas Avdeheid, who used to be the chair of the BRICS Astronomy Working Group, is no longer with the department. He is now taken an early retirement and is a consultant. So that's why you don't see him here for the first time. But I put his picture here so that at least we can really acknowledge the contribution he has made to this partnership. I think if it was not for him, probably we wouldn't be here. And he provided leadership and guidance from the very first BRICS meeting, up until last year when we were in Durban. So he was my boss. We had a very good partnership between him and I. We worked very well together. Of course, I do miss him, and I'm sure you also are missing him at this conference as well, because I think he was very dedicated and hardworking to make sure that the BRICS Astronomy Working Group is an efficient and effective group. So I know, because I think some of you were already asking me some questions, where is Thomas? And that is the reason why he's not with us. But he has sent some regards to all of you. And I promise him that when we take the group photos and the outcomes, I will send it to him because he's still very much interested to follow up on the work that he was championing. So at the last year's meeting in Durban, I think we received about 18 concept proposals for the flagships, and we had to narrow down that to at least 3 or 4. And then this professor here, I think, was requested to facilitate that process. There was a task team that was put in place to help us to go through the 18 proposals and then come and reduce that to 3 flagship proposals. So you can see there was a bit of work that was done there as I was trying to do that. And that is the same gentleman later that evening. After the hard work, you could see that he was also leading as well by showing us some dancing skills. This was my team from the Secretariat, the beautiful ladies that were helping me with the Durban meeting. Yeah, so basically that is just the summary of what I was saying earlier. So the theme of the workshop last year in Durban was ideas for strengthening the BRICS astronomy into the future, which is really the flagship proposals. And also last year, we welcomed the reinstatement of astronomy as an eligible focus area under the 3rd BRICS STI calls. And then, as I said, there were 18 concept proposals that were presented, and then we had to reduce that to a manageable number. And like I said, I think the task team was able to do some clustering of the 18 proposals, and then came up with these 3 flagship thematic projects, which is optical transient network, neutral hydrogen, 21 centimeters cosmology, and the big data infrastructure collaboration towards the SKA, LSST, and other future. So you're going to be getting detailed presentations just after my talk here today. So I'm not going to go through them because I think the experts are here to tell you more about the detailed proposals. And in your information pack here that you are given, so you have the detailed 3 proposals that were submitted, and the experts will then take you through the presentation. So I think our role in the next, during these presentations is to review this proposal, to just make sure that indeed they are addressing what was requested from those proposals, but also to have further discussions, on this and the proposals. Okay. I think that was the criteria that were given and the template that those 3 proposals should try to meet these requirements of being very comprehensive. So I think that is how we should be able to judge those proposals, whether they were able to meet these requirements. Okay, just to give you also an overview, just a summary on the funding situation. As mentioned, there are calls for proposals every year by the BRICS, overall secretariat. So you'll see that from the first call to the second call, and also there was a 3rd call last year. So we'll just give you some statistics of what has happened since then. Sorry for the mistake here. But I think during the BRICS Astronomy Working Group on Wednesday, I think we'll also get more details on this from Eunice. But I think this was the last slide, that I had, on some of the projects, that were, funded. And basically, the success rate was about 7%, because remember, these BRICS calls are for all the thematic areas. So astronomy is competing with all the other thematic areas, and these are small amounts of funding. Let's say maybe about R1 million or so. To fund these mainly scientific projects. So Eunice, I don't know if you want to say anything further on this. Yeah, so I think we can go into the details of this. Yes. Well, but in total, yes. Yeah. Yeah, but I think the drop in the overall numbers probably has to do with this low success rate. So probably people. Yes. Yeah, and well, I think that is why you will understand that when we came up with the idea of flagship programs, proposals, was that we know that this kind of funding is not what will take the BRICS collaboration to a higher level, because these are very small amounts. So we do need some serious funding to be able to do something meaningful within the BRICS collaboration. And so that's why we are investing time on the proposals, so that we can go back to the BRICS governments and say, this is what we think we can do to change, to elevate astronomy within the BRICS, to a higher level. Because this is, small projects really, which are the same order of magnitude as sort of bilateral type of, calls that you will have, let's say, between South Africa and China, or South Africa and Russia, and so on.
One important thing is that we should note that during some years, the Brazilian BRICS organization didn't provide astronomy with an internal call.
Yes.
So for some years, the Brazilian astronomy could not apply for the flagship project because CNPq don't include the astronomy on the Brazilian side. So
this was the first time.
This year, 2019, was the first year that the Brazilian founding agency included astronomy on the call. So
now, well done.
That this happened, and expect that didn't
happen before.
Yeah. But finally.
No, well done. So at least you can also participate. Yeah. So you did put in proposals as well. Okay. Okay, so we hope for the best. All right. Well, this is just a summary of over the past 5 years, what we've been up to as a BRICS collaboration. And I'm glad that Bruno indicated yesterday, this might look small for the 5 years, but if you were to compare it with other BRICS, priority areas, we're probably ahead of the pack, because we knew from the start that it is going to take us a lot of effort to get the communities in the 5 countries just to get to know each other, and to develop common interests and to set up, all the processes, that are required. So, so that's what we invested the last 5 years, doing all of these things, to the point, where we are today. Okay. Of course, what are the challenges to the BRICS astronomy collaboration? Of course, language and cultural barriers. This is a very diverse BRICS community, and as Bruno said, that even when this was started 5 years ago, he was very skeptical, also because of the distances between these countries. Exactly. Yeah, the time zones and everything, yeah. So, it's not a very easy. And of course, also the response from the communities in the 5 countries, has not always been great, somewhat slow, but nevertheless, we've been doing our best to communicate and to create awareness and to try to make these meetings as meaningful as possible. And of course, the success rate through the BRICS calls is very low due to limited funding within the BRICS at the moment. Although the interest, was very high, but from what Eunice said, perhaps that interest is beginning to go down because of, these issues. And then funding, as I said, is limited, and this can risk credibility of this collaboration if it is not, the funding situation is not improved. Of course, from the Secretariat, our capacity also is limited. We don't have a dedicated full-time person. Myself, I've got also a very busy portfolio, heading the astronomy portfolio in South Africa. Does not make it easy either. But, we try and do as much as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mann.
So you mentioned there were 3 projects. You mentioned there were 3 projects approved back in 2016-17 in the first call. Are the people who got these projects approved here? Are they participating in the meetings? Do we know the status of this project? Some follow-ups?
Yeah, well, actually, good question. Maybe we should have made a provision in this program to have received updates on those projects that were funded through the BRICS calls, so that people know exactly where we are. Because I know, for instance, David is one of them, and maybe there could be others. So yes, I don't know if Eunice or David, you want to comment further on that? All right.
The one that involved South Africa.
Yes.
The other 2 did not involve South Africa, so I don't know what the status of those are.
Yes. All right.
Certainly there's representation from the one that involved South Africa.
Yeah. All right. Eunice?
But just in general, what happened was that, again, the funds are far lower than what we got here. But those 3 collaborations are actually given rise to these 3 flagship projects. Because what happened was that last year's meeting in South Africa, those 18 projects were presented. And several of those were as a result of those the 3 initial projects that were funded. But again, it was limited, it's still limited to, exchange of ideas, workshops, etc., and not the substantive leap that we're now looking for in terms of the flagship projects.
In any case, that's not lost, so it's
Yeah, it's a forerunner. It's basically a forerunner to the 3 flagship projects. That's basically what it is.
Takalani, you forgot to mention one call. It was South Africa, Russia call. And I know that at least one was accepted. It's between David and Andrei Zhilkin. It's a new one, so
A
you
new
should
one.
remember. Yes.
That's bilateral.
Yes, it's bilateral.
Oh, so you're talking about the bilateral. Now we're talking about the BRICS call. Yes. Yeah, but of course that is another leg as well, which is important. That of course you do have a lot of bilateral partnerships between some of these BRIC countries. You know, so I was just only focusing on the BRICS calls, but of course, I mean earlier this year we were in Shanghai, so between South Africa and China, you know, there is other projects as well that we are funding. But like as Eunice says, but all these projects tend also to feed into these 3 flagships one way or the other, in a way, because those bilateral projects have also helped to cultivate the partnerships which are now probably, you know, will bear fruit in the whole BRICS collaboration.
And I wanted to ask another thing. So you mentioned that the success rate is not so high, so there is a lot of competition and not so much funding. And you mentioned yesterday in your introduction that, for example, the declaration that came out from the BRICS meeting in Campinas 2 weeks ago emphasized the importance of connecting to society, to the problems of the world, to development and things like this. So clearly, when you look at the other topics, water resources, pollution, that connects very directly.
Yes.
So what would be your suggestion for astronomy in order to be more attractive for funding in the context of this Campinas Declaration and the fact that these projects are expected to have an impact in the countries?
Yeah. Well, I think that is why in the criteria we emphasize those kind of things, that these proposals should talk to socio-economic impact issues, you know, and also how it, you know, some of these things relate and the relevance, you know, to the other things like outreach, human capital development, and the 4th industrial revolution, involvement of the, you know, so I think that is how we should, you know, strengthen our proposal so that when the governments and the politicians look at them, you know, they're not only seeing the science, but they can see other aspects which are important to them. So I think that's, you know, so that's why I'm saying that we have to judge our proposals to see if they meet this. Of course, scientific excellence must not be compromised. It must be there. It must make it must be clear. But I think these other things are just as important. Yeah.
Hi, for those of you who didn't attend the earlier meetings, can you remind us for the 3 projects that had been funded, what was the level of funding in terms of dollar amount per year or total? Or also for the 3 flagship programs that are under discussion, what would be the reasonable expectation in terms of the funding level?
Eunice, you want to take all that?
Eunice, please. Eunice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think I'm talking from the South African side again, you know, and I think the levels were the same. We had roughly about 900K over about 300K per year for 3 years, which is roughly like $20,000 per year for a 3-year period, which was, as you say, is not a lot of money. And if you look at the 3 flagship proposals that will be presented today and tomorrow, they're looking for some substantive increase in that funding. We're now looking at something like about 1.1 million euros a year or something to that effect. And the euro is stronger than the dollar. So you can see this funding gap that Takalani spoke about. To really have serious collaborations and do some serious science and human capital development and have serious impact, we need that sort of level of funding at least. About €1 million per year for each of the projects.
And this would come from a centralized BRICS funding, or
well, ideally what we like to see is basically a central pool with all governments contributing. And then from there we know we've got the funding for the 3 projects and we can get going and we can have a central, again, once they get presented, what we're looking for is a coordinated approach because all 3 projects are linked. You have Russ's big data, which underpins the other 2 as well. And they're all linked because they're all looking at using Meerkat, LSST, and the newer generation of telescopes, etc. Yeah. So what we're looking at is sort of a biggish integrated approach to the whole BRICS astronomy development.
Of course, we have to be honest to say, there is no existing BRICS funding pot at the moment. What is there is the small amounts. But, what Thomas used to argue is that, we have reached a level where if we don't start lobbying our governments and taking a proactive step to say this is what we want to do, if you want this collaboration, if you are taking this collaboration seriously and you want it to continue into the future, this is what it means. So there is no, funding pot at the moment. All we're doing is to be proactive and take these proposals back to them and to say, for astronomy, this is what we want to do, and we request that you. So I think that's the exercise that we are being very ambitious.
I agree with you, Takalani said, but astronomy is used to do that.
Yes.
Because if you are pollution or energy or things like that, you can ask for the money before you do something. In the perspective of doing something in the future. Astronomy, if you ask the money this way, you get nothing. So what we usually we do something and then we ask money to just to say we did that without money. We can do more and more, and then we get some money and we go growing.
I just looked up the real numbers. It was about 650,000 rands that was contributed to the one BRICS proposal that involved South Africa. 650 for the 3 years, which was back then the exchange rate about $50,000 total, but that was from each partner. So South Africa contributed that, and in that case, the rules were you had to have at least 3 countries involved, and the only 3 that were involved were Russia, India, and South Africa.
Okay, please, thank you, Takalani.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next talk, Dr. David Buckley from South Africa, and we'll talk about the BRICS Optical Transient Network.
I better start from the first slide. How do I negotiate this? Is it not on? I'm not sure how to move the slides. Is there a?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So my challenge now is to get my own back on Takalani for the slides that he showed. Okay, let's start at the beginning here. Right. So I'm going to give you an overview of the the flagship project that I was responsible to put together, but it includes PIs from all of the other BRICS countries and something like now 60 investigators in total. So it was quite a big joint effort to put this together. And it builds on work which has been happening, I guess, in most of the BRICS countries in time domain and transient astronomy. And in South Africa, since 2016, we've been involved in a large program which has been harnessing SALT, the Southern African Large Telescope, a 10-meter telescope in the Southern Hemisphere, to do transient follow-up. And so I'm going to use that example for what we've been doing already and how it sort of leads into the plans going forward for transient astronomy within the BRICS countries. And I think Takalani's already sort of mentioned all of these. You know, the reason for the BRICS astronomy program is because of the fact that we have common aspirations. We want to enhance human capacity development within our own countries. We want to be at the forefront of science, technology, and innovation. So those are all things which the governments all support. And specifically for the astronomy programs within BRICS, we want to leverage the existing facilities. And for South Africa, that involves SALT, the 10-meter class telescope, the recently opened over a year ago now Meerkat radio telescope array of 64 dishes, which will become, in fact, phase one of the square kilometer array in about 7 years' time. And also in the Southern Hemisphere, there's HESS, which is a Cherenkov ground-based TV gamma ray observatory. But there's many synergies with the facilities in all of these countries, and I didn't have time to put slides together on all of the facilities, but every country has a number of different forefront facilities which could be used for this study of astronomy, and in particular in the context of this, of the transient astronomy. So what is transient astronomy? It's basically looking at time domain, how things vary in the universe. And it really has opened a new discovery space with the number of facilities and the types of instrumentation that's available now for astronomers. It allows us to look on a wide range of timescales of variability, right down to milliseconds for very fast phenomena, up to years, decades even for slowly varying phenomena. But you need to have the facilities to do this, and in many cases you need those facilities to be able to react quickly to rapid discoveries. And so transient astronomy in the context of this proposal is covering everything, essentially, from the nearest objects. A large science driver for this is characterizing, discovering near-Earth objects, potentially hazardous objects, in fact. So those may be to some astronomers boring, you know, they're just lumps of rock, but, you know, if one came in over Rio de Janeiro, we'd all know about it. But to also really interesting astrophysical processes. And, you know, the most recent one, of course, is gravitational wave astronomy, the merging of neutron stars, which has opened a whole new frontier. And people are now actively working very hard to find the electromagnetic counterparts to these. And it's not an easy task. And so what we're envisaging here is a network of telescopes in the long run that will be able to look and discover transients, and using our existing and maybe future facilities do the necessary follow-up to characterize them and to get the real astrophysics out. So the program that we've been running in South Africa, and sort of parallel to what we think would happen within the BRICS countries, covers many different classes of objects, and it involves looking at things on a variety of timescales and luminosities. we're quite used to sort of looking at things over in this domain where the timescales are days or hundreds of days, things like classical novae and supernovae, even more exotic things like tidal disruption events and so on. But there's this whole discovery space at the shorter timescales, which we've only just starting to put our toe in the water, so to speak, to sample these. And so this is really, I think, what this program has to offer, the ability to probe down to low timescales and a wider range of luminosity. So this slide here is just one example of this famous GW 1708-17 event, which really revolutionized astronomy. The first time we found an optical counterpart to a gravitational wave event, and I'll be mentioning that because SALT was intimately involved in that and got the spectrum 1.2 days after the event. So these things mentioned in red are the most recent and maybe the most sort of forefront things which we're doing at the moment, multi-messenger astronomy follow-up, and certainly within South Africa using Meerkat and the Thundercat program, and Patrick will be talking about that later today. So at the moment there are many facilities globally which are involved in finding transients. Many of them are ground-based, dedicated just to that task, but also a lot of them are just finding them as a byproduct of their main science driver. For example, some of the satellite missions like Gaia, which is doing this amazing job to map our Milky Way, is finding many transient objects, and these need to be followed up because some of them are interesting types of objects. And so within South Africa, we've had this program, as I said, running since 2016 to do the follow-up of transients which are discovered by all of these different facilities. And we've had one running in South Africa since 2014, our own one, which is a joint Russian project to look for optical transients. So the program started in 2016. It involves lots of people and lots of telescope time, and it's been incredibly successful. There's been 27 refereed papers, some of them in Nature Astronomy and Science. So we're actually doing really good work, I think. And we're paving the way to the future because South Africa is going to be involved in the LSST, as is, I believe, Brazil and China, and I don't know about India and Russia, but who knows. So this is, in summary, what it's all about, the program that we've been running already. It has a large amount of time per semester and a large fraction in what we call target of opportunity override that allows us quickly to jump to the top of the queue when we need to for a compelling event, say a GRB, for example, or a kilonova, for example. So the program at the moment has been involving many institutions in South Africa and within the SALT partnership, and it's recently extended to sort of flow into some of the BRICS astronomy projects. And so we've had other programs that have involved both Russia, India, and China, which is sort of broadening the sort of membership or the collaboration to some extent. So I just want to give this one science driver as an example of what we could be doing with a more wider, more capable network. So this was the follow-up that we did with of the GW 1708-17 event, which involves SALT for spectroscopy, an infrared telescope, and MASTER, an optical imaging telescope. And the outcome of that was that we were one of the first 3 telescopes to get spectra 1.2 days after the event. And so the data that we obtained in South Africa was featured in the end, 9 refereed papers, including in Nature and Science. And this huge multi-messenger paper, which is, the sort of, I guess, Rosetta Stone for this, where we were Steve and I and others in the audience were one of the 3,677 authors on that paper. But we also produced our own paper, which was on specifically this SALT data and looking at the implications in terms of the current kilonova models. LSST is like on the horizon. It will be starting to do commissioning observations from 2021 and should be in full survey mode beginning 2023. This will be a game changer for transient astronomy in the terms of the number of transient objects that are going to be generated. And so there'll be huge opportunity, but huge challenges for the follow-up that will be needed. This is big data. And so we have identified this as one of the sort of linchpins, and I think probably Russ will be talking about it in the big data proposal. That this is something which, if you like, we have a sort of synergy between the big data drivers and the science that we want to do with LSST. So just as some background on where we are now, I think, well, Takalani has also already mentioned about how we got where we got in terms of these flagship projects. It was something that came out of the meeting in India, in Pune, in 2017. And these 18 so-called concept note proposals were reviewed in October last year at the last BRICS Astronomy Group meeting. And at Thomas's behest, there was a task team appointed, which I chaired, and involved representatives from all BRICS countries. And then we were given a set of criteria to look at how these proposals could be rated, if you like, and with particular criteria. And in the end, what came out of that, as Takalani's already mentioned, are these three proposals here, with the PIs mentioned, but these are, of course, big proposals with lots of other co-investigators. So three were, well, the one that's on transient science involved three of the concept note proposals. The one that I had presented, the one that Jifeng Liu from China, and the one Boris Shustov presented. And these were, in the end, combined into the proposal that we submitted in August. And the criteria are all listed here. So, you know, the appropriateness of this as being a new large-scale project that would not be funded under the existing framework of the STI program that we've heard all about, which typically have 3-year small budgets. This is the next scale up. But most importantly is like what we want to do is to have scientific impact, to be internationally competitive. Not to just be said, oh, you're just doing what the Americans are doing or what the Europeans are doing. We want to do something unique and something that will stand out. And so that was one of the criteria. Another criteria was to maximize participation by all BRICS countries, as many as possible, ideally all 5 of them, to do all of the things that Takalani mentioned about socioeconomic benefits, human capacity development, and so on. So these were all the criteria, and in the end, the 3 programs that were put together or approved to go forward as full proposals were the 3 here, which we're hearing about in this order. So they're in no particular order other than I'm presenting the first one, Russ will present the next, and Yunjia will present the third one. So in terms of the BRICS optical transient network concept, these are the general aims. I'm not going to read through them. You can look at them yourself. But basically, it's really to enhance collaboration scientifically so that we can work together. I mean, there's lots of bilaterals already happening within BRICS. So there's China, South Africa, there's South Africa, Russia, there's India, China. So all of these are sort of happening already. And the idea is to sort of promote this as a full BRICS program, which would utilize and leverage the existing facilities and draw on the opportunities that all of us have already, because we're already doing scientific collaborations with many other countries around the world. And so we have the advantage that we have access sometimes to facilities which we can draw on in a wider, more sort of holistic program. So in terms of the proposal on BRICS transients, there are over 60 investigators, and these are the numbers, just the sheer numbers of the investigators on this program. And it covers, as I said, it covers what is already to some extent being done on a smaller scale with the BRICS, with the SALT transient program, covering many different classes of objects, and some of them becoming quite important, like gravitational waves, fast radio transients. And so all of these things are areas that are discussed in our proposal. And of course, the challenging things in terms of technology, because what we want to do is to network our existing telescopes together to make them a more automated, more efficient way of doing follow-up. In the era, even now, in the era of the Zwicky transient factory, there are hundreds of thousands of transients that are being detected a night. And so it's only through machine learning and automated sort of brokering of these events that the sort of interesting ones are being pulled out, you know, the wheat from the chaff. And so to develop the software to do that, the brokering and marshalling software to select objects and to do the follow-up is incredibly important, and that's something which this program will be involved in, and of course all of the data processing as well. So the program aims to involve students in this and young researchers. So we aim to have 6 postdoctoral fellowships for the tenure of the program per year, and 12 postgraduate scholarships. And this would be something that we would really try to get co-supervision and involvement of all the BRICS countries, so that students in Brazil or students in India or South Africa would have an opportunity to go and spend some time at one of the other institutions to sort of, you know, promote the collaboration, because that's where it's going to happen in the future. It's not people my age who are sort of coming to the end of their careers. It's the youth, the new students, new young researchers. So that's, I think, going to be a great opportunity for young researchers going forward with this program. Also, when we were told about what criteria these flagship programs should follow, one of them was, Thomas always said, you know, we have that much money in the budget, right? So we have to go out and hope that we will find the money to go forward to these ambitious programs. And a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues are totally skeptical that this will ever get any real money at all. But I always point to the fact that when SALT began, after South Africa had become, you know, a sort of normal country after the legacy of apartheid, there were lots of science, bilateral science agreements signed by different countries. And there was one signed by Poland and South Africa in the late 90s. And SALT came along at the right time because they had no real program to say, well, what are we going to spend this money that we said we're going to do? And SALT came along just at the right time for the Polish astronomical community to say to their government, well, here's a program, what about contributing to this? And that worked brilliantly. This was a top-driven thing, not from the grassroots astronomers saying, you know, they wanted to join SALT initially. It was because the ministers and the presidents and prime ministers of the countries said, okay, we want to have this collaboration. And they found money in different pots to the traditional money that we all compete for within the science systems. So I have this sort of perhaps naive view that this may happen with BRICS, but we shall see, of course. So anyway, we were told by Thomas to start small and think big. So start with like a modest budget, but really think if you want to do something compelling, and if the BRICS governments do want to do something compelling, they'll have to put their money where their mouth is. And so the idea is that this is a staged approach, and so we start off by utilizing existing facilities, spend the effort necessary to network them, to make them work efficiently in an automated way to follow up transients, and to spread that amongst all the BRICS countries. And so some of this work, which involves developing event brokers and marshalling software that allows the follow-up, it's already being done with the ZTF facility and the growth follow-up program in the United States. This is a Caltech-run, large budget project. But this is showing the way forward, I think. And it's a challenge because we have a heterogeneous collection of telescopes. Some of them that we've been now doing this sort of work to bring them to this level go back to the 1930s. I mean, Steve Potter's going to probably mention it in his talk, that the Radcliffe telescope, 1938, this ancient telescope, is now something that can potentially be part of a network that can be, in the future, run as an automatic follow-up machine. And so we have, within SAO, led by Steve, started a new project this year called the SAO's Intelligent Observatory. And I won't say any more about it, other than to say it's going to involve many of the telescopes that you see in this picture. We have over 20 telescopes now on the plateau, and they're just growing up like mushrooms. Every year there's a new one that comes. Some of them, most of them are actually from other countries where we have agreements to host these. But when I looked at this, and Steve might correct me, I thought there's something like 11 telescopes that could be involved in the automatic transient follow-up, if you include the 3 of the existing Las Cumbres telescope. And so it will involve this sort of, in the end, having this machine that will take alerts wherever they come from. They might be, say, from SWIFT for a gamma ray burst, an alert comes in. Or it might be from our local master, or from MEALICT, which Patrick's going to talk about, the optical telescope that's dedicated to find optical counterparts of radio transients. All of these will be sort of processed and a decision made, what's appropriate? Do we do any follow-up? Do we do a spectrum with SALT? Do we do an infrared observation with the Japanese infrared telescope? Or imaging, whatever. That's the sort of high-level plan, and I think Steve will be talking about it in more detail. So it involves both old telescopes, but also our newest ones, which these are 2 telescopes designed to be robotic telescopes. And I've already mentioned MEALICT, but I won't say anything more other than it's a nice new facility that just began last year, and that will also feed into this intelligent observatory. So the second phase of the program, the more ambitious and the more costly phase, is to develop an automated network distributed in latitude and longitude of 72 wide field, 25 square degree field telescopes. Why so many? The idea is to look at all 4 pi steradians of the sky continuously with a cadence, ideally, of 30 minutes, with a limiting magnitude of about 21 in 3 filters. So this is this is not a new concept. Well, it's relatively new. I think it's probably 6 months before we started thinking about this, I was already made aware of the Citian project, which Roberto will be speaking about, which was being proposed in China by Jifeng Liu. And so this idea is now sort of encapsulated into the BRICS optical transient network. And sort of the drivers are, of course, all of these sort of things that we desperately want to understand. The whole nature of neutron-star mergers for gravitational wave, core collapse, superluminous supernovae. All of these things here are sort of the top sort of topics of interest. But also, importantly, because of the fact that we're incorporating also the ideas that have come from our Russian colleagues, from Boris Shustov's proposal on Phobos,
detection of potentially hazardous objects. This network can also address the detection of threatening objects to the Earth, 10-meter-sized asteroids of the sort like the Chelyabinsk-type event, which, if it happened that something like that exploded over a city, would not be great. And so the science drivers in the proposal cover all of this. This is a nice diagram that shows where we stand in terms of like magnitude and cadence with existing surveys. So we're fully aware that there are many surveys around the world already operating to find transients. The most successful at the moment seem to be ZTF and also Assassin and Atlas. But these are, at least in terms of Assassin and Atlas, these are sort of limited in terms of sky coverage because it's only one or a pair of telescopes at the moment for the Atlas. This is Pan-STARRS, by the way, and Sky Mapper, the Australian one. LSST is shown up here. All of these are certainly at probing very faint optical limits. But what we're looking at is not going quite as faint, but having the cadence to look at short transient variability on timescales of hours. LSST, that I've been singing its praises, is a fantastic machine, but it only has a cadence of maybe a couple of days. So this is why we think this is a compelling proposal. So here are the top-level requirements for this new network. I won't go over the details here, but suffice to say that it needs to have a large survey rate to achieve such a cadence. It will involve fast readout cameras for efficiency, but also to allow potential for time-resolved photometry. And the idea would be to start to build prototypes as money comes in. And already the groups that are involved in this, particularly in China and Russia, are doing this already. And so one of the first things to do is a design study, a trade-off study of the various types of designs that have been put forward, some of them even built, which I think Dimitri will talk about. So these are different designs for wide-field telescopes, some of them quite novel, like this 3-meter Paul Baker design over here. This is, well, the other ones, the ones that are being put forward for Citian is actually a wide-field Schmidt design. But I think we need to, as a group, if this goes forward, is to look at all of the potential parameter space and look at all of the implications in terms of manufacturability, tolerancing, and so on, which will dictate the cost. This is not going to be cheap. So the camera at the moment, the concepts are for SCMOS cameras. The control system, this is a sort of high-level idea of how the whole system would be. This is really just taking it from Jifeng's Citian-based approach. But I think we need to look very carefully at how the Zwicky Transient Factory are doing this or have done this, because I think there's a lot to be learnt there. The benefits for BRICS is that it promotes and develops the use of our facilities. It involves both science and engineering. A large aspect will be software engineering, to write the software to do the sort of brokering and marshalling that I mentioned. Has a large potential for human capacity development, and a huge scientific potential on the multi-wavelength studies of astronomical transients. Although this network is an optical transient network, within our group, we are involved in multi-wavelength. So in South Africa, of course, with Meerkat, in Russia, now with Spectrum RG, which is a new X-ray facility with eRosita and ART-XC instruments. China is involved in X-ray astronomy. There are future plans for missions from India in ultraviolet astronomy. There's the World Space Observatory, which is a 1.7 meter ultraviolet telescope, which is due to be launched in the mid-2020s, I believe. So we all have between us access to other multi-wavelength facilities. And so having these is sort of extra, adds a huge amount of extra to the collaboration. And if we start with what we have and then grow as the funding allows, then I think this is a tractable way to move forward. And as far as I'm concerned, and of course I'm totally biased because I wrote the proposal, or co-wrote the proposal, I believe it ticks all the boxes for a flagship program. Thank you. Oh, I've got mine. Oh, you need it for the audience, yeah.
Question for David?
Hi, David. Thanks for the nice presentation. Very comprehensive. Of course, two things become very clear from this proposal. I mean, its strength relies on that all the countries are working together, because then we have a full coverage of all the latitudes and longitudes, and we have all the facilities that is needed.
Yes, if I might just interrupt you, although the idea is that these facilities would be located within the BRICS countries, we're not bound to just putting them there. So I know, for example, for the Citian project that China has been looking at the idea of putting some of the facilities in Chile and in Australia. So I think we would be looking at the best places, ideally, to put these facilities in to cover the latitude and longitude.
Perfect, yes. And the second aspect that can make it competitive against other international facilities is the computational power involved, which means the intelligent brokers and good databases, accessibility of this information and things like that. So I think it has these two ingredients where it really sits. But so I have two questions. The first one is on the phase one. Basically, it does not involve construction of new instruments or networks. And if I'm not mistaken, it relies a lot on some big facilities. Yes?
What do you mean by, well, no, actually, in terms of at least the Intelligent Observatory network in South Africa, it's a lot of sort of 1 meter class telescopes. It does involve SALT, yes. But actually the concept is to bring together more like the 2 meter class telescopes, maybe like the new 3.5 meter in India telescope as well.
Okay, yes, because my question was, what would be the time availability of these big facilities? But if it doesn't rely so much on that, then
yes. So of course, the whole idea of doing this is there's going to be various requirements. Like, you know, we say we've got all these 11 telescopes in Sutherland, but some of them are co-owned by other groups. Exactly. So it's not like we'll have 100% of the time all the time. So what we would hope is that we'll negotiate, okay, we'll have a certain fraction for target of opportunity override. On this telescope, it might be half the time. This other telescope, it might be 20% of the time. Mm-hmm. So these will all be like filters, I suppose, and you know there'll have to be clever software that Steve's going to write, which will do all the bookkeeping to say this telescope is used so much of the time for the transient program and so on. Other telescopes, the idea is that because they're more attuned to doing this sort of thing, they'll actually be doing transients most of the time. Okay. So you're right that you know it's complicated. And in our proposal, I must be honest to say that, you know, what you were saying about the data handling, that's something which is not really addressed very well. And so I think I'm putting it somewhat into the other proposal, which Russ is going to talk about, because we're already talking with them about, or I've, you know, had agreement that LSST forms part of the big data. And maybe this program should also, so that within the BRICS collaboration, if there's a BRICS-wide big data program going ahead, then that's a sort of natural fit, right, between the data we're generating by all these observations and where it goes and how it gets handled. I don't know if Russ agrees with me. I hope he does, but yes, he does.
Yes. Okay. In any case, so it's important to try to gauge the possibility of time availability of these facilities while advancing the project.
Yes, and in fact, as a parallel task that I have taken on in part of the LSST transients and variable star collaboration is to provide a spreadsheet of every observatory in the world that might do follow-up of LSST and list their capabilities and what the potential access might be and how that access might be achieved. Is it achieved through collaboration with a person who has time? Is it something that is done through like the observatory governing body itself? A lot of these things have to be resolved for LSST, and similarly they would have to be resolved for our program as well.
Okay, and my second question is, could we start, before having funds and things like this, a pathfinder of what phase 2 should look like, using facilities and group activities that are already there?
Right, yeah, well, I mean, I did sort of allude to the fact that whether or not this program is approved or whatever, or any money comes, there are already initiatives going ahead. And I think Roberto will report on this, that the Chinese government has given sort of positive signals that the Citian project is going to be supported. And so at least I would imagine that there'll be some prototype telescope that's built. And certainly in Russia, if I'm not mistaken from Dmitry, this has already gone ahead, right? So I think, yes, you're right. We don't just suddenly go in phase 2 and say, okay, the 72 telescopes, 1 meter class telescopes. No, we have to do the initial design work, prove it, build one, run it. Yeah.
David, I have a question about funding. Did you estimate the total cost of the project?
Well, yes, a very crude one of 280 million euros.
Okay, so this idea, it's not very expensive for
well,
BRICS.
Yeah, I just know that when I mentioned it to some of my colleagues, their eyes rolled and they, yes, I can see Patrick look. Sitting there.
No, I mean in comparison, for example, with space mission, it's the price of one middle-class space mission.
Yes.
And the influence for the science is higher.
I'm fully on the same page, and I remember when we had the meeting in India, there were ideas of putting something on the moon. I think you had that idea, right?
It was dropped.
Yes.
And so it means that the idea to divide the phase 2 by a few steps is quite reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
prototypes, 12, I don't know how many, and after that...
yeah, I would certainly say that this proposal as it stands right now, which is a 6-year proposal with a 280 million euro spend, is highly unlikely to happen on that timescale or that budget.
Yes, but it's
we have to start somewhere, and we can cut our cloth to fit.
Takalani will ask money for the full proposals, so you should at least estimate the different steps.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one of the first tasks, I think, when this proposal, if this proposal gets the go-ahead to do something concrete, right?
Thank you for a comprehensive talk and discussion of and describing the flagship proposal. So I have 3 questions. So, what is the place of the proposal in comparison with other transient proposals, transient projects in the world? First, and this first question, and how maybe is a adjustment question to this: how to incorporate this proposal in worldwide efforts for
Yes.
transients? First question.
Well, look, I'm aware that there are many different groups who are developing transient detection and follow-up facilities. I mean, in China, there's already this GWAC facility, which has been designed. Yeah, it's dedicated for gamma rays for the SVOM mission. And I know there's many other ones, and there's probably some that I not even aware of. So, you know, I have to admit that, you know, I'm not aware of every single project that happens. And in fact, I only became aware of the Citian project by bumping into Roberto, I think, in the IAU General Assembly last year, because it was a brand new proposal. When a delegation of us from South Africa went to China in November 2017, it wasn't even mentioned because it didn't exist then. So things are very dynamic. Whether or not there's another group sitting in a room somewhere else in the world talking about a network to cover 4 pi steradians of the sky with a cadence of 30 minutes to a depth of 21, I don't know. I mean, that's obviously worth putting out there to find if there's other people, you know, doing this sort of stuff already. But I somehow doubt it because the people that I've spoken to are who I would expect to know, like people at ZTF, there isn't anything like that being conceived right now. So.
Thank you. Second question, you didn't mention any small size aperture telescope. Your smallest aperture was 1 meter.
Yes.
But nevertheless, if you talk about GWAC, it is a small telescope. It's just an array of small telescopes. What's your opinion? Is it still a place for transient investigation for small telescopes?
Yeah.
With less apertures than 1 meter.
Of course there is. You know there is. So
Yeah,
you want me to answer the question that you already know the answer to.
Nevertheless, but I would like to ask to ask you.
No. My opinion is yes.
Your opinion, yeah.
My opinion is that, I mean, Assassin has been a fantastic mission. I mean, it's carrying on, but it's, you know, it's only small lenses and a 17th magnitude reach. But look at all of the fascinating types of transient objects that it's found. And therefore, I do believe that there's room, and particularly the idea that these smaller aperture, shallower survey telescopes, if they're equipped with fast detectors, fast cameras, then they have a real chance of doing something quite compelling that hasn't been done before. So although, you know, in terms of the intelligent observatory and the networking, we've just been talking about sort of 1 meter class, although I would say half a meter is in the 1 meter class, but I don't know, it's semantics. But certainly, I would not preclude the idea that you would have smaller aperture facilities which have a niche to do different types of science. Not going to the really faint objects, but to look at some of the things that are close by that otherwise we could completely miss, and probably are completely missing because we don't have the full sky coverage.
Maybe not close, but bright.
Bright. Sorry, bright. Bright.
And the last question, thank you. What's your opinion? What is immediate actions to do just to start the project?
Right.
And first, and the second part of the question, can we start the project without financing from our governments?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I know from the South African side that this work is beginning within South Africa under this so-called Intelligent Observatory project, which you're going to hear Steve talk about. So that is a funded project within South Africa. It's funded. It has provision for the hiring of software engineers. There are already people involved. There's someone this week, actually, at a workshop in Pasadena talking to the Las Cumbres people who have developed the brokering software and also the tools that are needed to manage telescopes and instruments and so on. So what's often referred to as TOMS, telescopes and observation management systems, which are designed to feed into any particular telescope control system using APIs. So that work is happening in South Africa. I'm not aware, I mean, I hope this will be a good opportunity to find out from some of the other countries what they see, because, everyone says, yes, we need to network telescopes, and of course, within SAO, we're one organization with a whole lot of telescopes under our purview, but in other countries, it's a bit more heterogeneous, right? It's independent observatories with different governing, so it may be more challenging to do, but I think that it's a tractable thing. It's not going to be impossible to do this task if there's a will to do it. And so that's where I would say that this BRICS program, if it gets the go-ahead, and the fact that, okay, there's already momentum through the South African initiative, that this might help, bootstrap the similar types of things of observatories in Russia or observatories in China, India, Brazil. But, I can't speak for my co-investigators, but I would hope that they'll have some inputs into this and say, okay, this is what we see the challenges to be, and maybe we should start with this telescope or these telescopes, and yeah.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you all, and we go for coffee and posters now. We'll return in 20 minutes at 11 here. Thank you.
Thanks.